I've been thinking about that doorknob for 3 years now. The way the metal felt under my palm, cold, ordinary, utterly forgettable except for the fact that someone else's hand was already there. His hand. Jonah's hand. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know anything about him except that we live in the same building and sometimes passed each other in the hallway with the kind of polite half-smile you give to strangers you see too often to ignore completely. It was a Tuesday in late September. I remember because I just gotten off a double shift at the bookstore and my feet ached in that specific way that makes you feel older than 22. The building's front door had a temperamental lock that stuck when it rained, and it had been raining all afternoon. That fine, persistent drizzle that soaks through everything without you noticing until you're already cold. I was coming in from the street, umbrella dripping, thinking about nothing except getting upstairs and collapsing on my couch with whatever leftovers were still edible in my fridge. I reached for the interior door, the one between the lobby and the stairwell. At the exact moment he reached for it from the other side, our hands collided on the knob. For a second, neither of us moved. My palm pressed against the back of his hand, his fingers curled around the metal beneath mine. It couldn't have lasted more than a heartbeat, maybe two, but I felt it everywhere. The warmth of his skin, the slight hesitation before either of us pulled away. The door between us, still closed, holding us both in that accidental intimacy. I looked up, through the narrow window in the door. His eyes met mine. Hazel, startled, wider than they needed to be for such a small collision. He had the kind of face that looked like it smiled easily, even though he wasn't smiling yet. Dark hair falling slightly across his forehead, rain-dampened. A navy jacket with the collar turned up against the weather. Then he laughed. It broke the stillness between us like breath across glass. He pulled the door open from his side, stepping back to let me through, and when he spoke his voice had that slightly flustered quality of someone who's been caught off guard and is trying to recover their footing. He said we were bad at coordination. I stepped into the warmth of the stairwell, shaking rain from my umbrella, and something made me say it. Maybe it was the way he was still looking at me, or the fact that my hand still tingled where his had been. I told him maybe it was a sign. I don't know why I said that. I'm not usually the kind of person who says things like that. Not out loud, not to strangers. But it felt true in the moment, even though I knew how it sounded. Naive, romantic in that embarrassing way that makes people uncomfortable. He shook his head immediately. He said he didn't believe in fate. But something happened when our eyes met again. His grin faltered. Not like it disappeared, but like something underneath it shifted, became visible for just a second before he could hide it again. Something softer, something uncertain. We stood there in the stairwell for a moment that stretched too long to be comfortable. Water dripped from my umbrella onto the worn tile floor. Someone's television murmured through the walls. The building settled around us with its familiar creaks and sighs. Then he moved past me toward the stairs, and I thought that would be the end of it. Another brief encounter. Another face I'd half recognize in the hallway and never really know. I started up the stairs behind him, keeping a respectful distance, and told myself it didn't matter that I could still feel the ghost of his hand under mine. We lived on the same floor. I'd always known that in a vague way. I'd seen him before, coming and going, always in a hurry, always with his headphones in or his phone pressed to his ear. But I'd never known which apartment was his. Now I watched him pause at 3C, right next to my door at 3B. We were neighbors, separated by a wall so thin I could sometimes hear his music late at night, though I'd never known it was his music until that moment. He glanced back at me as he unlocked his door. Our eyes caught again, and this time he smiled. A real smile, smaller than the laugh from before, but somehow more honest. Then he disappeared inside, and I was left standing in the hallway, key in hand, wondering why my heart was beating faster than it should have been after climbing 3 flights of stairs. I let myself into my apartment and dropped my bag by the door, peeled off my wet jacket, stood in my small kitchen, staring at the wall we shared, the one that separated 3B from 3C, and thought about how strange it was that someone could live 15 feet away from you for months and remain a complete mystery until a single moment of accidental contact rewrote the space between you. I didn't know his name yet, didn't know what he did for work, or where he was from, or why he was always in such a hurry. Didn't know that he drank his coffee black and hated mornings and had a younger sister he called every Sunday. Didn't know that his laugh would become the most familiar sound in my life, or that the hesitation in his voice when he talked about things that mattered would break my heart in the gentlest possible way. All I knew was that my hand had touched his on a cold doorknob, and something had shifted, something small and irrevocable. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was nothing, that fate wasn't real, and coincidence was just coincidence, and people reach for the same door handle 1,000 times a day without it meaning anything at all. But I kept thinking about the way his smile had faltered, the softness that had flickered behind his eyes, the fact that he'd looked back. I didn't know then that 3 years later, I'd still be thinking about it, that the moment would replay in my mind with perfect clarity whenever I needed to remember why I believed in impossible things. That he'd eventually tell me, almost shyly, after months of pretending he was too rational for romance, that maybe just that once, maybe it really had been fate. All I knew that night was that something had begun, and that when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the cold metal of the doorknob and the unexpected warmth of his hand covering mine. I was 22 that fall, working part-time at an independent bookstore near the university and taking night classes I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. My life had a rhythm to it, steady and unremarkable. I noticed things other people didn't. The way the morning light changed angles through October, how the same elderly woman bought a newspaper at the corner store every Thursday at exactly 9:15, the particular sound the building's radiator made when it kicked on for the first time each evening. I'd always been like that, watching the world happen around me, cataloging the small patterns that made up ordinary existence. I liked the predictability of it, knowing which subway car would be least crowded at 7:30, which route home avoided the most traffic noise. The comfort of routine felt like control, even when everything else felt uncertain. My apartment in 3B was small, a studio that had been optimistically described as cozy in the listing, but was really just cramped. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room all at once. A kitchen barely large enough to turn around in. A bathroom with tiles that had probably been white sometime in the previous decade. But the rent was manageable, and the building was quiet, and the window faced east, so I got morning sun, which felt like enough. I've been living there for 8 months. Long enough to learn the building's rhythms. The couple in 2A who fought every Saturday night. The college student in 4D who practiced violin at odd hours. The super who only fixed things if you caught him before noon. Long enough to recognize faces without knowing names, to nod at neighbors in passing without ever quite crossing the line into conversation. Jonah, though I didn't know to call him that yet, was one of those faces. The guy from 3C, 23, I'd later learn, though he carried himself with the kind of casual confidence that could have read as older. He had an energy about him that felt deliberate, purposeful. When I saw him in the hallway, he was always moving with direction, keys already in hand, destination clear, no time wasted on hesitation. He dressed like someone who'd figured out a uniform that worked and stuck with it. Dark jeans, simple jackets, boots that looked expensive but worn in. His hair was always slightly messy in that way that seemed accidental, but probably wasn't. And he smiled easily at people, at the mail carrier, at the woman from 2B with her small dog, at me on the rare occasions our schedules aligned enough for our paths to cross. But those smiles never quite reached his eyes. They were pleasant, polite, the kind of smile that keeps the world at a comfortable distance. I learned a few things about him just from proximity. He kept odd hours, sometimes leaving for work before dawn, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. He ordered takeout often enough that the delivery drivers knew which buzzer to press. He listened to music loud enough that I could hear the bass through our shared wall, though never late enough to actually bother me. Indie rock mostly, sometimes jazz, occasionally something I couldn't quite identify. And he was always alone. I never heard another voice through the wall, never saw him with friends in the hallway, never noticed anyone coming or going from 3C except him. I didn't think much about it. People live alone. People keep to themselves. I certainly did. But after the doorknob, after that moment of contact that lasted a heartbeat too long, I found myself paying attention differently, listening for his footsteps in the hall. noticing when his door opened and closed, wondering about the person on the other side of that thin wall in a way I hadn't before. I told myself it was just curiosity, natural interest after an awkward encounter. But I knew it was more than that. I knew because my pulse quickened when I heard his key in his lock, because I started timing my trips to the mailbox and the laundry room, half hoping to run into him, half terrified that I would, because I kept replaying that moment. His hand under mine, the way his laugh had sounded, surprised, genuine, a little nervous. The softness in his eyes when his smile faltered. The fact that he'd said he didn't believe in fate, but had looked at me like maybe, just for a second, he'd wanted to. I didn't know anything real about him yet. Didn't know that he worked in marketing for a company he found soulless, but paid well. Didn't know he was pragmatic to a fault, that he planned everything, that uncertainty made him uncomfortable in ways he'd never quite admit. Didn't know that beneath all that charming self-assurance was someone who was just as scared of connection as I was, maybe more. All I knew was that something had shifted between 3B and 3C, that the walls separating us felt thinner than it had before, that when I lay in bed at night and heard his music through the plaster, I wondered what he was thinking about. If he was thinking about me, if he could still feel it too. That electric moment when our hands met on cold metal and the world narrowed to just the two of us, standing on opposite sides of a door that suddenly felt like the only thing that mattered. The knock came the next evening, just after 7. 3 deliberate raps on my door that made my heart jump before I could tell a not to. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never expected anyone. For a second, I considered not answering, staying quiet on my couch with my book and my tea, and pretending I hadn't heard. But then the knock came again, softer this time, almost tentative, and I found myself standing before I'd consciously decided to move. When I opened the door, Jonah was leaning against the frame with that same easy posture I'd seen in the hallway a dozen times before. But up close, without a door between us, I noticed details I'd missed. The way his jacket hung, slightly off one shoulder. A small scar near his left eyebrow. The fact that his confidence had cracks in it, visible now in the way he shifted his weight, the way his smile didn't quite settle. He said he figured he should properly meet the guy who tried to steal his exit yesterday. The joke landed gently between us. I felt my own mouth curve into a smile despite the nervousness coiling in my chest. I told him I was pretty sure he was the one blocking the door. He laughed at that, and the sound was different than it had been in the stairwell. Less startled, warmer. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee, and the question came out casual, almost careless, like it didn't matter either way. But his eyes gave him away, watching my face too carefully, waiting for an answer that clearly mattered more than he wanted to admit. I said yes. We went to a place 2 blocks away, a small cafe I'd passed 100 times but never entered. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and a chalkboard menu that seemed to change daily based on the owner's mood. Jonah ordered black coffee. I got tea. We sat by the window, and the conversation started exactly the way you'd expect. 2 neighbors comparing notes on the building, the neighborhood, the mundane details of coexisting in the same small corner of the city. He told me he'd lived in 3C for almost a year. Asked how long I'd been in 3B. We talked about the radiator situation, the unreliable hot water, the way the whole building seemed to tilt slightly to the left on the 4th floor. Safe topics. Easy topics. The kind of small talk that fills space without requiring anything real. But then something shifted. I don't remember exactly how it happened. Who asked the first question that mattered? Who offered the first piece of actual truth? Maybe it was the way the light fell through the window, warm and golden as the sun started to set. Maybe it was the second cup of coffee, the way time stretched when neither of us made a move to leave. Maybe it was just that some conversations find their own depth whether you plan for it or not. He told me about his job, how he spent his days writing copy for product he didn't care about, convincing people to want things they didn't need. Said it with a self-deprecating shrug, like he was admitting to something he wasn't quite proud of but had made peace with. I told him about the bookstore, about my night classes that I wasn't sure were leading anywhere, about feeling stuck in the in-between of things. He nodded like he understood that. Said he'd been stuck for a while too. The cafe started to empty around us. The owner began wiping down tables, giving us those polite looks that meant closing time was approaching. Jonah glanced at his watch and seemed surprised by the time. We'd been there for almost 3 hours. Walking back, the evening had turned cool. Our breath misted slightly in the air between us. We fell in a step easily, our paces matching without trying. At one point his hand brushed mine, just briefly, just the backs of our fingers grazing as we walked, and the contact sent an echo of that doorknob moment through me. I wondered if he felt it too. Wondered if that's why he shifted slightly closer instead of away. At the building entrance, he held the door for me. Then he grinned and said maybe we were getting better at coordination. I told him practice makes perfect. His smile softened at that. He asked if I wanted to do it again sometime. Coffee, he meant, or maybe dinner. Something. I said I'd like that. We climbed the stairs together, slower than necessary, and when we reached the 3rd floor, we both hesitated in the hallway between our doors. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Someone's television murmured through the walls. The building settled around us with its familiar sounds. He said goodnight, but he didn't move to unlock his door yet. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something open and uncertain and maybe a little scared. I said goodnight back, told him thanks for the coffee. He said anytime, then added, quieter, that he was glad we finally met. Properly, he meant I watched him disappear in a 3C before I let myself in a 3B. And when I closed my door and leaned against it, I could hear him moving around on the other side of our shared wall. Could hear water running, cabinets opening and closing, the soft shuffle of evening routine. But it sounded different now. Closer, somehow. Like the wall between us had grown thinner with every word we'd exchanged. Coffee became a regular thing. Then it became dinner. Then it became standing in the hallway between our doors at midnight, still talking, neither of us wanting to be the first to say, we should probably get some sleep. Our routines started shifting without either of us acknowledging it out loud. I'd always left for my morning shift at the bookstore around 8. Jonah usually got home from his office around 8:15. For weeks, those schedules had kept us apart, our lives moving in opposite rhythms. But suddenly I found myself leaving 5 minutes later. Then 10, taking extra time with my coffee, reorganizing my bag, checking my phone for messages that hadn't come. And he started arriving home earlier. Not by much at first, just a few minutes, easily explained by traffic patterns or meeting times. But enough that we began crossing paths in the building's entrance in the narrow hallway on the stairs. We both pretended it was coincidence. He'd look up from his phone with that same expression of pleasant surprise, as if running into me was completely unexpected. I'd smile and say something about the timing, about how funny it was that we kept missing each other for months and now couldn't seem to avoid it. And we'd both laugh like it was true, like we hadn't carefully calibrated our schedules to manufacture these moments. The touches became more frequent. Not intentional exactly, but not entirely accidental either. His hand on my shoulder when he squeezed past me on the stairs. My fingers brushing his when we both reached for the mailbox keys at the same time. The way we'd stand just slightly too close in doorways, in the cafe, in the narrow space between our apartment doors. Every time, there was that same electric current, that same awareness of exactly where his body was in relation to mine. One morning I was running late, juggling my bag and my keys and a travel mug of tea that was too full and threatening to spill. I made it to the building entrance just as Jonah was coming in from his morning run, something I hadn't known he did, though I filed the information away like everything else I was learning about him. He was breathing hard, his t-shirt dark with sweat, earbuds still in. He saw me struggling with the door and reached around me to pull it open, his arm extending past my shoulder. For a second we were caught in that position, him behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, smell the clean sweat and whatever detergent he used on his clothes. He said something about how the universe just wanted us to share doors forever. His voice was light, teasing, but there was an edge to it. A question underneath the joke. I turned to look at him over my shoulder, and his face was closer than I'd expected. Close enough to see the flush across his cheekbones from the run. The way his chest was still rising and falling with exertion, the fleck of gold in his left eye that I'd never noticed before. I asked if that would be so bad. He didn't answer right away, just held the door open, held my gaze, and something passed between us that felt too significant for a Wednesday morning in a building entryway. Then he stepped back, created space, and that easy smile returned to his face. But his eyes stayed serious. After that, the morning crossings became routine, expected, something we both oriented our days around, even though neither of us said so. He started waiting. I noticed it first when I came out of my apartment one morning and heard his door open a few seconds later, too precisely timed to be chance. When I glanced back, he was locking up, making a show of checking his pockets for his phone, his wallet. Not looking at me, but clearly aware I was there. I started doing it too, listening for his footsteps in the hall, timing my exit so we'd end up walking down the stairs together, making it seem natural, unplanned, just another coincidence in a growing string of them. And every morning, there was the door. The same door where it had started, where our hands had first touched on cold metal and something had shifted in the space between us. Now it became almost ceremonial, the way we'd both reach for it at the same time, the way our fingers would brush, neither of us pulling away as quickly as we could have. Sometimes his hand would cover mine completely, warm and solid and deliberate. Sometimes our fingers would tangle together for just a heartbeat before one of us pulled the door open. Sometimes we'd both pause with our hands touching the knob, frozen in that moment of contact before the spell broke and the world resumed moving around us. He never said anything about it. Neither did I. But the touches grew longer, more certain, less like accidents, and more like inevitabilities. One morning, after his fingers had lingered against mine for what felt like forever, he held the door open and looked at me with an expression I'd started to recognize. Vulnerable, searching, like he was trying to figure out if I felt what he felt. I walked through, and our shoulders brushed in the doorway. Neither of us moved to create more space. The rain outside had started again, that same fine drizzle from the day we'd first touched. But this time when I looked at him, he was already looking back. And neither of us was pretending anymore that any of this was an accident. The storm came on a Thursday night in late October, the kind that rattled windows and turned the streets into rivers. I'd been at the bookstore when the sky opened up, and by the time I made it home, I was soaked through despite my umbrella, my shoes squelching with every step. The building's lights flickered as I climbed the stairs. Once, twice, then steadied. But when I reached the third floor, everything went dark. I stopped in the hallway, letting my eyes adjust. The emergency lighting hadn't kicked in yet. Outside, lightning flashed, throwing brief illumination through the window at the end of the hall before plunging everything back into darkness. Thunder followed, close enough to feel in my chest. I was fumbling for my phone for the flashlight feature I never used when I heard his door open. Jonah's voice came through the darkness, asking if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just trying to find my keys. My hands were shaking from the cold, from being wet, from the adrenaline of walking home through the storm. I couldn't get a good grip on anything. He said to hang on. A moment later, light bloomed from his phone, and then he was there beside me in the hallway, close enough that I could see water dripping from his hair, too. He must have just gotten home as well. The power didn't come back. We stood there in the narrow beam of his phone's flashlight, both of us dripping rainwater onto the worn carpet, and something about the darkness made everything feel smaller, more intimate, like the world had contracted to just the two of us and the sound of rain against the windows. He asked if I wanted to wait it out in his apartment, said he had candles, and his phone was almost fully charged. I followed him into 3C, and it was strange finally seeing the space I'd only imagined. The layout was a mirror of mine. Same dimensions, same inefficient kitchen, same single room, trying to be everything at once. But it felt different, more organized somehow, everything in its place. Books stacked neatly on a shelf. A desk with a laptop and a neat row of pens. Minimal decoration, functional like someone who didn't want to get too attached to staying. He lit candles and set them around the room, on the coffee table, the kitchen counter, the windowsill. The warm light flickered across the walls, creating shadows that moved and shifted with each gust of wind outside. We sat on his couch, and he offered me a towel from his bathroom. I dried my hair as best I could while he did the same. The silence between us felt comfortable now, familiar. We'd spent enough time together that quiet didn't need to be filled. But then he spoke, his voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. He said he kept thinking about that first day. I looked at him. The candlelight caught the angles of his face, made his eyes darker. I asked him why. He leaned back against the couch, his head tipping back to stare at the ceiling. His laugh was small, almost embarrassed. He said because he hadn't gone a day without replaying it. That it was stupid, just a doorknob, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. The rain hammered against the windows. Another flash of lightning, another roll of thunder. The building creaked around us. I waited. I'd learned that about him over the past few weeks, that he needed space to find his words, that pushing only made him retreat into jokes and deflection. He lowered his gaze to meet mine. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said maybe that's what fate really was. Something small that won't let go. My heart was beating too fast. I told him he said he didn't believe in fate. He smiled at that, but it was different from his usual smile. Sadder somehow, more honest. He said he was starting to think maybe he'd been wrong, that he'd spent so long trying to control everything, plan everything, keep everything at a safe distance. But then there was the doorknob, and then there was me on the other side of that door. And no matter how much he told himself it was just coincidence, just proximity, just two people who happened to live next to each other, he couldn't make himself believe it. The candles flickered. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up. He said he'd try not to think about it too much. Try to keep things casual, friendly, safe. But every time our hands touched on that door, every morning when he timed his routine to cross paths with mine, every conversation that ran later than it should have, he felt it. That same electric current from the first moment getting stronger instead of fading. He looked at me like he was confessing something he shouldn't, something that made him vulnerable in a way he clearly wasn't comfortable with. His pragmatism, his certainty, his need for control, all of it was slipping away, and I could see it scared him. I didn't know what to say. Didn't trust my voice not to shake if I tried to speak. Because everything he was describing, I felt it too. I've been feeling it since that first touch of hands on cold metal. The power stayed out. The storm continued. And we sat there in the candlelight, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him beside me, far enough that there was still a choice to be made. He whispered that maybe he believed in it now. Not fate exactly, but something like it. Something inevitable that had started the moment our hands met and hadn't stopped pulling us together since. The candlelight made everything feel suspended, like we'd stepped outside of normal time into something slower, more deliberate. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside the air had gone still, charged with all the things neither of us had said until now. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my fingertips, in every part of me that was aware of how close he was. Close enough that if I shifted even slightly, our shoulders would touch. Close enough to see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, slightly faster than normal. I heard myself ask if he believed in it now. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended, barely audible over the rain. He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was so open it almost hurt to witness. All of his careful composure had fallen away, leaving only the raw truth of whatever he was feeling. His eyes searched mine like he was trying to memorize something, or maybe trying to find permission for what came next. He said he believed in this. 2 words. Simple. Definitive. But the weight behind them was enormous. This. Not fate. Not destiny. Not some cosmic force beyond our control. Just this. The specific gravity between us. The pull that had started with an accidental touch and had been growing stronger every day since. The choice we were both standing at the edge of, terrified and certain all at once. I should have said something. Should have found words that matched the moment. But my throat had closed around everything I wanted to tell him, that I'd been feeling it too, that every morning I timed my exit just to see him, that the wall between our apartments had started to feel like the only thing in the world that mattered because he was on the other side of it. Instead, I moved closer. It wasn't a big movement, just a shift of weight, a lean that closed the small distance still separating us. But it was enough. Enough to make the intention clear. Enough to cross the line we'd both been carefully walking for weeks. His breath caught. I watched his eyes drop to my lips, then back up to meet my gaze, asking a question without words. I didn't know how to answer except to close the rest of the space between us. Our hands found each other first, not by accident this time, not a brush of fingers or an incidental touch in a doorway. His hand reached for mine deliberately, and I met him halfway, our fingers tangling together with the same rightness I'd felt that very first time on the doorknob. But this was different. This was choosing it. Choosing him. Choosing to stop pretending this was anything other than what it had been from the beginning. His palm pressed against mine, warm and solid and certain. Our fingers interlaced, fitting together like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Like they already knew exactly where they belonged. He exhaled, and the sound was relief and surrender all at once. His other hand came up to my face, fingers brushing along my jawline with a tenderness that made my eyes burn. His thumb traced the curve of my cheek, and I could feel the slight tremor in his touch, the nervousness underneath all that careful certainty. I leaned into his hand, letting my eyes close for just a second, letting myself feel it fully, the warmth of his skin, the gentleness of the touch, the weight of this moment that we'd been building toward since that first day in the stairwell. When I opened my eyes, he was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his irises, could count his eyelashes if I wanted to. His forehead rested against mine, and we stayed like that, breathing the same air, our hands still clasped together between us. Outside, the rain sounded like applause. Like the whole world was celebrating this choice we were making, this leap into something neither of us could control or plan or keep at a safe distance anymore. He whispered my name. Just that. Reese, but the way he said it made it sound like a question and an answer and a promise all at once. I said his name back, Jonah, and it felt like the first time I'd said it out loud, even though we'd been using each other's names for weeks now. This time it meant something different. This time it was an acknowledgement of everything that had led us here. His hand tightened around mine. His other hand slid from my face to the back of my neck, fingers threading into my still damp hair. And then he was kissing me, finally, and it was nothing like I'd imagined and exactly what I'd hoped for all at once. Soft at first, tentative, like he was still asking permission even though I'd already given it. But then I kissed him back and something shifted, the hesitation falling away, replaced by certainty, by need, by weeks of wanting compressed into this single moment. The candles flickered around us. The storm raged on outside. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about that doorknob, that first touch, how impossible it seemed that something so small could lead to this. But Jonah had been right. That's what fate really was. Not some grand design, but a small moment that refused to let go. A touch that became a thread, that became a lifeline, pulling two people together until the choice to fall became inevitable. We pulled apart just enough to breathe, our foreheads still pressed together, our hands still clasped between us like we were afraid to let go. He smiled against my lips, a real smile, unguarded and beautiful. And I smiled back, feeling something in my chest crack open and flood with warmth. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But in here, in the candlelight, with our hands intertwined exactly where they were supposed to be, everything felt still. Settled. Right. That was 3 years ago now. 3 years since the storm, since the candles, since the night we stopped pretending that any of this was accidental. 3 years since I learned what it felt like to fall asleep next to someone and wake up to find them still there, solid and real, and choosing to stay. We still live in the same building. Different apartment now. We moved into a one-bedroom on the 4th floor about 6 months after that night, the one with slightly better water pressure and a window that faces west instead of east. But we kept our routines, kept the rhythms we'd built together. Every morning, we leave for work around the same time. We've stopped pretending it's coincidence. Now it's just what we do. Move through our morning in synchrony, a choreography we've perfected through repetition. Coffee for him, tea for me. His keys on the hook by the door, mine in my jacket pocket. The small negotiations of sharing space with someone you love. And every morning, there's the door. We joke about it now. The doorknob thing, Jonah calls it, with that half smile that still makes my heart skip even after 3 years. He tells people the story at parties, at dinners with friends, making it sound charming and serendipitous. He always ends it the same way, saying he doesn't believe in fate, but pausing just long enough for everyone to know he's not entirely sure that's true anymore. But what he doesn't tell them is that he still waits. Every single morning, his hand on the doorknob, he pauses for just a second. Just long enough for me to reach it too. Just long enough for our hands to meet. Sometimes I reach first. Sometimes he does. But we always end up there together, fingers brushing or overlapping or tangling, skin against skin and metal beneath our palms. It's become our ritual, our reminder, the small daily reenactment of how we began. I asked him once why he still does it, why he waits when it would be easier, faster to just open the door and go. We were running late that morning, both of us rushing, and still he'd pause with his hand on the knob until mine covered his. He looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. He said because that's where it started, because some things are worth slowing down for. Then he'd smiled, squeezed my hand, and pulled the door open for us both. There are moments when I forget about it. Days when we're distracted or exhausted, or moving too fast through our routines to pay attention to the small rituals that hold us together. On those days, one of us will reach the door first and open it without thinking, and there's always this tiny flutter of loss, this sense that we've missed something important. But then the next morning, we're back in sync. Both reaching, both waiting, both choosing this small moment of connection before we step out into the world. People ask us sometimes how we knew it was real, how we knew it would last, how we knew to take the risk of falling for someone who lived 15 feet away and could have made everything impossibly complicated if it hadn't worked out. Jonah usually deflects, says something about good timing or compatible schedules or the convenience of not having to coordinate whose place to stay at. He plays it light, casual, like what we have is simple and uncomplicated. But later, when it's just us, when we're lying in bed with the lights off and the city sounds filtering through the window, he tells the truth. He says he knew because he couldn't stop thinking about my hand on that doorknob. Because every rational part of him said it was nothing, just a random moment, just proximity and coincidence. But some other part of him, the part he'd spent his whole life trying to ignore, knew it meant something. He says he knew because, for the first time in his life, he wanted to believe in fate. I tell him I knew because I'd spent months living next to him, hearing his music through the walls, passing him in hallways, and feeling nothing. And then one accidental touch changed everything. Made me notice him, made me want to know him, made the wall between us feel like the most important wall in the world because he was on the other side of it. I tell him I knew because some things just fit, like fingers interlacing, like hands meeting on a doorknob, exactly where they're supposed to be. Now, when we leave in the mornings, our hands find each other automatically. On the doorknob first, always. Then walking down the stairs, fingers loosely linked. Then at the building entrance, one last squeeze before we separate for the day. Him heading east toward his office, me heading west toward the bookstore where I still work, where I'm managing now instead of just shelving. And every time, just before he lets go, he looks at me with that expression I've come to know so well. The one that's part affection, part wonder, part disbelief that this is his life now. Sometimes he says he loves me. Sometimes he doesn't need to. Either way, I know I'll see him tonight. Know that tomorrow morning we'll do it all again. The tea, the coffee, the synchronized movements of two people who've learned each other's rhythms. The pause at the door, the meeting of hands, the small daily choice to keep choosing this. Maybe it's not fate. Maybe it never was. Maybe it's just us, reaching for the same moment again and again, finding each other exactly where we started. But it feels like destiny anyway.